is my pleasure to welcome you to the American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey, New Findings on Culture and Language Experiences of Tribal Head Start Children webinar. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded currently. I'm Laura Horde from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and I'm one of the federal staff working on this important project. Just some housekeeping information for you. During the webinar, we will place all callers on mute. You can save your questions until the end of the webinar when we'll open the line, and you can raise your hand on the right-hand side, or you can type questions into the question pane on the right side of the screen. We do open the line for questions, like I said, to raise your hand, and we'll just call on you as you have raised your hand and your line will be unmuted. Please silence all cell phones or background noises when you're asking any questions. We want to be sure that we can hear you. And lastly, the webinar recording will be available in the future on the OPRE website that you're going to see at the end of the presentation. And I now would like to introduce Angie Godfrey, the Region 11 Program Manager from the Office of Head Start.
Good day, everyone. It's nice to be on the call and on the webinar, and particularly to be able to welcome you on behalf of the Office of Head Start. This AIAN Faces First Findings is a pretty exciting webinar, and I hope that you will all learn many things from it today, and thank you for being here. The first slide that I'm going to talk about is about Region 11, American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start programs, and who we are. As you see from the map, it shows the entire country, and in the Office of Head Start, there are 12 regions. 10 regions are funded to geographic areas, and there are 2 national regions. And Region 11, American Indian Alaska Native, serves 154 federally recognized tribes or consortia of tribe in 26 states. So all of the red states show where we serve children. And if you look on the first pie chart on the left side of the page, it shows the Region 11 Head Start children. We serve 85% of the children we serve in those 26 states are American Indian and Alaska Native children, and 15% are non-AIAN children. And if you look on the other side of the page you will see on the other pie chart the number of American Indian and Alaska Native children served across the country. In regions 1 through 10, the geographic regions, 51% of the children AIAN children served are served through those 10 regions. And then Region 11 serves 49% of the American Indian and Alaska Native children in Head Start and Early Head Start programs. And on the next slide, I will just introduce the presenters who are going to be on the webinar today. First is Dr. Michelle Sarche from the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus from the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center. And then Drs. Lisa Malone and Sarah Bernstein from the Mathematica Policy Research. And then Ms. Mavany Verdugo, who's the Head Start Director, retired from the Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians. So welcome and enjoy the webinar, and I'll turn it over to the presenters.
Welcome, everybody. As Angie shared, my name is Michelle Sarche, and I'm at the University of Colorado and the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center. On behalf of all of the presenters today, it's our pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to share another chapter, so to speak, of the American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey story. Our story has been unfolding for a long time, as I think you'll hear in our presentation today, so we're happy to have a chance to share a bit of it with you today. To that end, we have 5 goals for today: to share information about the study background, so a little bit about what FACES is, and then what we did to plan for the American Indian and Alaska Native FACES study, to share information about the American Indian and Alaska Native FACES study itself, its goals, design, and participants, to share selected findings from the American Indian and Alaska Native FACES study about the cultural and language experiences of Region 11 children, and to hear from our colleague Mavany Verdugo, who will share her perspective on the study as a Region 11 Head Start director and as one of the earliest authors, if you will, of this story. And then to talk a bit about what's ahead for AIAN FACES, and to hear from all of you with any questions that you may have. As Laura shared, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box as we go, and we'll turn to those at the end. And also at the end, we'll take any additional questions that you may want to share by raising your hand, and we'll open up your lines at that time for those who raise their hand. So to get started, I'm going to share some information on the study background. The Family and Child Experiences Survey, or FACES, has served as an important source of national data on Head Start children, families, and programs. It started in 1997 as a study of program performance and was designed to provide descriptive information on children's cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development, the needs of children and families, and program characteristics such as teacher training, teacher practices, and classroom quality. Between 1997 and 2009, FACES was conducted every 3 years in regions 1 through 10, again, those geographic regions that Angie was talking about just a bit ago. But in 2012, FACES underwent a major redesign. So there was a 5-year gap from 2009 to 2014 when FACES was last conducted. And again, that was in regions 1 through 10. So although FACES was designed to provide a national picture of Head Start children, until 2015, it did not include findings for American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start children, and there were 2 reasons for this. One reason is that FACES data for American Indian and Alaska Native children in regions 1 through 10, so those children on the left side of the pie chart that Angie shared, were not reported. So even though their data were gathered as part of the FACES study in regions 1 through 10, the American Indian and Alaska Native children represented less than 1% of the total FACES population of over 3,000 children. As a result, the American Indian and Alaska Native sample was too small to report data separately. In other words, the margins of error were too large to yield meaningful estimates of the true population values for American Indian and Alaska Native children in regions 1 through 10 Head Start. The second reason that FACES did not report findings for American Indian and Alaska Native children in Head Start is that FACES data for Region 11 children, so those children on the right side of the pie chart that Angie shared, were not gathered. Again, Region 11 is comprised of Head Start programs that are operated by grants to federally recognized tribes or consortia of tribes. And as many of you are probably aware, tribal communities have many concerns about research in general, have unique and diverse protocols for research happening on in their communities that involve sovereign tribal nations. And as a result, planning and implementing research according to tribal best practices is very resource intensive. But in 2013, and as part of the redesign process that started in 2012, a work group was formed to address this gap being the fact that we didn't have any national data on American Indian and Alaska Native children in Head Start, and to ensure that Region 11 priorities were at the forefront of a study that, for the first time, would yield nationally representative findings for the children and families served by Region 11 Head Start. 4 groups came to the table and formed the American Indian and Alaska Native FACES Workgroup. Those groups included Region 11 Head Start directors, tribal early childhood researchers, federal staff from the Office of Head Start and the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and the study research team at Mathematica Policy Research. The work group sought to ensure that the study would be both scientifically and culturally grounded in terms of its design, implementation, and dissemination. So, for example, in terms of design, members of the work group collaborated to determine the population of interest, the study questions, and the methods and measures that would be used to answer those questions. And in just a second, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who will talk a little bit more about all of those things. In terms of implementation, members of the work group, especially the Head Start directors and the tribal early childhood researchers, provided guidance on recruiting tribal programs, children and families, and helped work through the tribal review processes in each community. And in terms of dissemination, members of the work group collaborated to determine the priorities for data reporting, including for this webinar today, and are in the process of reviewing a series of reports that will be shared. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lisa Malone, who's going to share more details about the study goals, design, and participants.
Thanks, Michelle. I'd like to spend a few minutes to describe the study that emerged from the collaboration discussed by Michelle. As she noted, the goals, the design, and participants of this first ever study of Region 11 Head Start children and families. AIAN FACES 2015 is a rich source of information about its children and families. The study is designed in particular to give Region 11 this rich source and to be able to inform policies and practices that addresses the needs of Region 11 children and families. As such, it aims to provide information on the demographic characteristics and home environments of children and families, the strengths and needs of the children and families, the school readiness skills that children have and are developing over time while they're in Head Start, as well as children's Head Start experiences. For AIAN FACES 2015, as Michelle noted, it was determined with the work group what the population of interest was to understand. Earlier you saw two pie charts, but for this study, it was determined to have a focus on Region 11 and all children in Region 11. So here we focus on that pie chart, all children in Region 11, the 85% who are American Indian and Alaska Native, as well as the 15% that are not American Indian and Alaska Native, but served in those Region 11 programs. And the three major goals in providing that rich source of information for Region 11 really were for the study to understand the cultural, tribal, and linguistic experiences of Native children and families, describe the strengths and needs of all children in Region 11, and as such, provide an accurate picture of all children and families served by Region 11. In doing so, AIAN FACES 2015 was designed to be representative of Region 11 as a whole. It is not a study of any one program or any one tribal community, but as we'll note later, these data can support individual programs by having the information now as this first picture of Region 11 and the children and families they serve. 21 randomly selected Region 11 Head Start programs participated, with the protocols for tribal review followed in each community. Not all programs or tribes agreed to participate given a variety of reasons, including the time it would take and the protocols that they needed as compared to the study related to the way of collecting data and the way data would be shared. But once tribes approved, we had very high participation rates, as shown on this slide. Within the 21 programs, there were 37 centers, 73 classrooms, and just over 1,000 children and parents, with over 90% of parents giving permission for their child to participate. The data were collected from each of these groups: the children, the parents, the teachers, the program and center directors, as well as the classrooms through classroom observations. Data were gathered over the course of one program year, the 2015-2016 year. In the fall and the spring, we gathered information on children's development in terms of their cognitive skills and language, literacy, and mathematics, and executive functioning as part of a direct child assessment, as well as a physical development where we measure their height and weight. We also collected information from teachers who reported on each individual child in AIAN FACES about their socio-emotional skills. Parents completed surveys in both the fall and the spring to provide information about the family, themselves, the home life, and the community experiences they had. In the spring, we added additional information by asking program and center directors and teachers to complete surveys about themselves, as well as about classroom and program practices. We also observed the classrooms and asked the teacher questions to understand more intently the classroom experiences and observed quality. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Bernstein, who will provide us some selected findings for today.
Thank you, Lisa. So today I'm going to present some selected findings, mostly from spring 2016. These findings are from parent, teacher, and center and program director surveys, as well as classroom observations, and they address two research questions. The first is about what kinds of language experiences and cultural connections AIAN children have in their homes and communities. And the second research question is about the kinds of cultural connections and language experiences children have in their Head Start programs and classrooms. So both of our research questions are about children's cultural and native language experiences in and out of Head Start. This is important for several reasons. The first is that culture and language are important underpinnings of children's development. Second, there's a movement to revitalize tribal language use in light of the historical trauma experienced by tribal communities. For example, the boarding school era, during which children were removed from their homes and communities and enrolled in boarding schools where they were not allowed to speak their tribal language or maintain cultural practices. Furthermore, in a recent early childhood needs assessment report, cultural and language resources were identified as key indicators. In 2004, ACF commissioned an initiative to develop a research agenda for American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start programs. Part of the initiative included listening sessions with staff, parents, and community members in tribal Head Start programs. One recommendation that came out of these sessions was that future research look at the development of tribal language skills and cultural identity and pride. Finally, although there's not a tremendous amount of work in this area, some research with Indigenous communities has identified the importance of including culture and native language in supporting young children's English language skills. Moreover, research with older Indigenous populations, so adolescents, has found that using a cultural framework and foundations for a variety of prevention programs can promote health and well-being. Before I move on to our findings, I want to note that while most children served by Region 11 Head Start programs are AIAN, some are not. To address the first research question, we focus only on the American Indian and Alaska Native children in our sample, their red pie slice. To address the second research question, we'll focus on all children in Region 11 Head Start programs. So first, we look at cultural and language, tribal language experiences that children have at home and in their community using data from parent surveys. As we'll see, the selected findings indicate that tribal language and culture are very important to American Indian and Alaska Native families served by Region 11 Head Start programs, but practices vary. Parents were asked to indicate if languages other than English are spoken in the home by anyone. We see that a tribal language is spoken in nearly half of homes of AIAN children, but most children's primary language is English. As you can see from the chart on the left, 51% of AIAN children live in homes where English is the only language spoken. 47% live in homes where a tribal language is spoken, and 9% live in homes where another non-English, non-tribal language is spoken. On the right side, we see that in terms of the primary home language, defined as the language primarily spoken to the child at home, most children, or 94%, live in households where English is the primary language spoken to them. 6% live in homes where a tribal language is the primary language spoken to them. From the previous slide, we saw that a tribal language was present in nearly half of AIAN children's homes, but it was often not the primary language spoken to the child. Here we see that across all households, parents believe it is important that their child learn the tribal language. Over 90% of parents of AIAN children indicate that it is somewhat or very important that their child learn the tribal language. 43% of children's parents in English-only households indicate it is very important that their child learn the tribal language, and 84% of children's parents in households where a tribal language is spoken feel that it's very important. Given the importance that parents attach to learning the tribal language, we were interested in the ways parents supported tribal language use. Parents reported on how often they used the tribal language in different ways or encouraged their child to learn the language in the past month. Most commonly, parents report that they often or very often encouraged their child to learn a tribal language, 56%, made sure their child heard the tribal language spoken by others, 44%, and used the tribal language in everyday life with the child, at 30% of children's parents. Community activities can instill cultural connections, and in the fall of the program year, parents were asked if their children had participated in various cultural activities with community members in the past month. These activities included listening to elders tell stories, participating in traditional ways such as hunting, dancing, singing, or drumming, working on traditional arts and crafts, participating in traditional ceremonies, and playing American Indian or Alaska Native games. 80% of AIAN children participated in at least one such activity in the past month. The most common activities were listening to elders tell stories, participating in traditional ways such as hunting, and activities that involved dancing, singing, or drumming, each of those being done by 44 to 49% of children. So unlike in the previous section, which focused on just AIAN children, in this section, we focus on all children who are served by Region 11 Head Start programs. So that's that whole pie. This is because American Indian and Alaska Native and non-AIAN children are enrolled in the same programs, centers, and classrooms. While we are presenting on two slightly different groups in the previous section and in this one, recall that AIAN children are the majority of all children served in Region 11 programs, the children we report on next. Background characteristics, so for example, family structure, parent education, and employment, are very similar between these two groups. The information in the next slides was collected in spring, and the statistics are weighted to represent all children enrolled in Region 11 in fall of 2015 and who were still enrolled in spring 2016. In these selected findings for the second research question, we'll see that children's programs and classrooms provide opportunities to learn their heritage language and interact with culture, though the exact resources may vary. Programs can ensure children's connections to culture in many ways. In AIAN Faces, we asked staff whether there was a cultural or language elder or specialist who served as a resource on tribal culture or language, and how that person was related to the program or community. The majority of children's center and program directors report that their center or program has a cultural or language elder or specialist. You can see that in the leftmost set of bars at 75 and 71%. 46% of children's teachers report that their classroom has a cultural or language elder or specialist that works in the classroom with children. In the bars on the right side of the black line, we see that these elders or specialists are most often a member of the tribal community. So 47% of children's program directors report that in programs with a cultural elder or language specialist, this person is a Head Start staff member. Regardless of whether there was a cultural or language elder or specialist, we wanted to understand children's exposure to culture and tribal language within the classroom. 23% of children are in classrooms that use a cultural curriculum, and 56% were in classrooms that receive tribal language lessons. 93% of children's teachers report speaking any tribal language at home or in the classroom. In the previous slide, we see tribal language lessons occur in over half of children's classrooms. We also asked what languages are used for instruction and when reading to children, with teachers able to report more than one language. English was the most common language used for classroom instruction and when reading to children. We also asked teachers in what languages printed materials such as children's books are available. English is also the most common language for printed material. However, 65% of children's classrooms also have instruction in a tribal language. Nearly 1/4 of children are in classrooms where children were read to in a tribal language, and over 1/3 of children are in classrooms with printed material in a tribal language. Teachers could select more than one response, so these percentages might sum to more than 100. Thinking back to the earlier slide on home language, and now tying that to what we know about classroom instruction, for 86% of children, their home language is used for classroom instruction. For AIAN FACES, we developed an observation tool to capture aspects of the cultural and language environment in the classroom. Observers were asked to note the presence of cultural objects according to several categories listed at the bottom of this slide. This is preliminary analysis of the data, and future analysis will need to be done to decide its most appropriate use. The intent of this component of the observation was to get an overall sense of the kinds of objects children might have in their classrooms, but not necessarily to report on the presence or absence of each type. While we would not expect objects in every category to be present in a single classroom, we see that 86% of children's classrooms had at least one cultural object. On average, children have cultural objects from 3 categories in their classrooms. The most common types of objects are cultural displays such as posters at 62%, native music and instruments at 60%, and tribal language labels, for example, labels on classroom materials or displays at 51%. So based on AIAN FACES, what does the data tell us? So culture and language are important to AIAN families served by Region 11 Head Start programs, but we see that practices differ at home and in the community. For example, learning a tribal language is a value among parents, but a tribal language is not spoken in as many homes as feel is important or very important. We also see that practices differ within children's Head Start programs. So for example, while over 70% of children are in programs where directors report having a cultural language elder or specialist, only 56% of children receive tribal language lessons, although 93% of children's teachers speak a tribal language. So while families feel learning a tribal language is important, and many programs and centers indicate they have cultural resources available, these cultural connections might be less formal in classrooms. In terms of implications, these should strengthen our appreciation and understanding of the cultural resources that are available to support the development of children in tribal communities. This can also further inform policy and practice initiatives to support linguistic diversity in Head Start. Understanding children's cultural context can help programs like Head Start to further support continuing the cultural and linguistic heritage that can be a value and strength of communities. Taking a step back and thinking about all of the data collected by AIAN FACES 2015 and how it can be used by various stakeholders. So AIAN FACES 2015 provides federal, tribal, and program stakeholders with data to inform their program and policy decisions. We've shared today selected findings for Region 11 that for Region 11 as a whole can argue for resources to address identified needs, and can also argue for changes to policy and practice to better meet those needs. In terms of individual programs in Region 11, individual programs might use these findings about Region 11 Head Start more broadly to think about how their program could be similar or different to Region 11 overall. Individual programs might also use the data on Region 11 as a whole with their individual tribal data to support the need for additional resources and services. Today's webinar is part of a broader set of presentations and sharing of this data, starting in the summer of 2016 at ACS National Research Conference and being presented in a number of venues through today's presentation, through today's webinar. And so I will actually turn it over to Mavany now, who's been involved with this study from the get-go, from the beginning, to share some reflections.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, I was recalling the history of frustration with research in regards to AIAN children in the various programs. And I can remember hearing really lively discussions from early FACES data collections when I would be at UCLA with the J&J Head Start Management Institute, and I asked why they weren't reporting anything on AIAN programs or children, and I was told in a large audience that our numbers were just too small to be included in this research, and I just felt really disregarded because they were really moving on this data. I could see that it was of value to these directors, and I really wanted to see that for us. So we started working on this with the National Indian Head Start Directors Association as we were rallying for the reauthorization of the Head Start Act, which for the first time had become a political football. So we knew that we needed to get language into the law that would open up research for our programs. So we went to our tribal leadership and we got them, the support from them to make that one of our priorities. And we were thrilled to get that language into the law. And then from that came the Tribal Research Center, or our Research Steering Committee. And we just started going from there, and it started coming together. So we really don't want to waste all of this effort. What we heard from communities is, why are you gathering this research? They were really getting sick of research just for research's sake. And so often times people had come in and gotten the information, and they really never gained from it or saw a positive result for their tribal community from it. So it can be different for us now because this is very specific to AIAN Head Start programs and the children. And so I remember when we were talking so much about planning and about using data and going to trainings to learn how to take all of our separate pieces of data that we collect in our programs, in addition to our PIR reports and various pieces. This is a very important piece that can be used for budget justifications and as part of our program plans. What makes me sad is we know that what sets us apart from the other regional programs is the culture and language element, but it's being lost rapidly where we don't prioritize it. And so hopefully we can use this to inspire classroom staff and managers to change or enhance their current efforts in this area in the program, especially including parents. I find that parents were the best providers of enhancing that in our programs. So for me, hopefully we can reach out and get data on the urban Indian children and Alaskan Native children. I know there's a large percentage out there that we don't have information on, and this might help us push into the future and see what's going on in that element too. Thank you.
Thanks, Mavany. So in that vein of what we can do with what we have from AIAN FACES 2015, I wanted to share some things that are coming ahead. So as Michelle talked about before, and hopefully I know is a theme throughout, and that hopefully has been communicated today, the AIAN FACES Workgroup continues to have a very critical role, with members providing input and suggestions for the reports and products that we'll be releasing using this data. We do have a series of products that will include more information from AIAN FACES 2015, and those products will be available in early 2018. They include a technical report with data tables and an introduction to the study design and execution, as well as a series of 3 topical briefs, one that provides a portrait of Region 11 Head Start children in fall 2015, another that looks at children's progress across the 2015-2016 program year, and a third that will cover information about children's cultural and language connections, likely overlapping some with the information we presented here today. In addition, data from AIAN FACES 2015 will be available for secondary analysis, and the data user's manual will also be available. This will come after the initial reporting, and the data will be available for qualified researchers. Having this data available was a priority identified by the AIAN FACES Workgroup and agreed to by all participating tribes. The data itself will be restricted and not available on the public website. It will have an application process that researchers will have to go through. However, the user's manual will be publicly available on the website. Information about data access can be found at the link on this slide, www.researchconnections.org. I will say we have this link on this slide, and we have some contact information on the next slide. We will be trying to send out an email shortly following this webinar with all of those links so that you don't have to worry about scribbling it all down very quickly right now. In addition to the reports and the data, we are beginning planning for AIAN FACES 2019. Again, the work group will play a very critical role to inform updates we make to our study design and implementation. AIAN FACES 2019 will involve a new sample that will be selected with recruitment planned for this coming fall 2018 and data collection to take place in the 2019-2020 program year. This slide just shows really briefly some of the additional reports and data products that will be coming out, in addition to providing an update at the National Indian Head Start Directors Association meeting this coming summer, and a journal article detailing the study design and implementation process that is also in the works. So for more information about AIAN FACES, you can contact Meryl Borofsky, Laura Horde at OPRE, or Lisa Malone or myself at Mathematica. In addition, we have a study website on ACF's webpage, and when these webinar slides are ready, this recording will be posted there as well. Now I think we have some good time for questions.
Great. So this is Laura Horde again, and I'm going to read the questions that we received, unless there's someone that might like to raise their hand and push the button, and we will open your line. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for folks to do that, I will read the questions we've received. So the first question is from Joseph Henry, and he'd like to know, how are school readiness skills measured in Native communities?
Thanks. This is Lisa Malone. So what we do is we have a one-on-one assessment with a person trained to conduct a battery of early childhood measures with the children. In the area of language, we look at receptive vocabulary with a measure called the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. In the area of expressive vocabulary, we have a measure called the Expressive One-Word Vocabulary Test. We look at children's literacy in terms of their early writing and their letter-word knowledge with measures from the Wilcox-Johnson. We also use a measure from another early childhood study called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Birth Cohort to look more at their connections and understandings about letters and sounds. In the area of math, we look at their ability to answer applied problems using the Wilcox-Johnson, and also some additional questions again from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study that looks at other math concepts that the Wilcox-Johnson for that age group doesn't necessarily look at. They complement each other really well around concepts like cardinality and counting. In that one-on-one assessment, we also try to take the holistic picture of children's development. We measure their height and weight, and the findings on these areas would be in that fall webinar that we did about a year or so ago, and that recording is up on the ACF website. We use height and weight then to calculate children's body mass index and look at the percentage of children who are normal weight, potentially overweight, or could potentially be classified obese. During that one-on-one assessment, we do also look at executive function to understand their ability to inhibit impulses and their working memory to follow some rules in a game fashion of a task that's commonly used with the preschool age group called the pencil tapping task. And then we also, in terms of school readiness, taking that holistic picture, look at their socio-emotional development by asking the teachers to report on children's social skills, any problem behaviors, but also their approaches to learning in areas of being curious, persistent, and how they're doing in the classroom.
Thanks, Lisa. This is Michelle.
from the University of Colorado team and Tribal Early Childhood Research Center. I just also wanted to add that, as I shared, this was one of the tasks of the work group to define what are our questions of interest, and then how do we go about answering those questions, what measures can we use. And in selecting measures, we really were guided by 3 possibilities. Those possibilities were to align ourselves being the American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start FACES study, with FACES in regions 1 through 10, the FACES that had been happening from 97 until 2009, now 2014. So we had the opportunity to align with the measures that were being used in FACES, and that would preserve our ability to to do direct comparisons, sort of more of an apples to apples type comparison to FACES if the work group decided that was an analysis or reporting priority. We also would have the ability to merge the data of AIAN children in regions 1 through 10 with the data of AIAN children in region 11 to approximate a picture of AIAN children in Head Start as a whole. So that there were a lot of compelling reasons that the work group decided to align, and the measures that Elisa shared really all aligned or matched what was used in FACES. But the work group also had a lot of concerns that I'm guessing others on the call share about how measures that were developed for use in other populations or not specifically designed for use with tribal populations, how those might hold up with tribal children and families. And so having these data will allow us to explore how those measures are looking for tribal populations. And also we had the opportunity to add and adapt as well to address some of those concerns. And one of the things that we did was, at a minimum, we wanted to make sure that the people doing those direct assessments, those one-on-one assessments with an adult interacting with a child, that those adults who were data collectors going into those tribal programs had a sense of what it means to be culturally sensitive to the different ways that tribal children may interact with an adult compared to children in other settings. And so we have the opportunity to partner with some tribal Head Start programs for those assessors to meet one-on-one with tribal children. And our tribal work group also helped develop a cultural understanding training for those assessors who may or may not have, most of them had not ever been to a tribal community. And that really connects to, I know, another question that you had, but I wanted to stop in case anyone wanted to reflect on that.
Yeah, I want to just chime in on what Michelle was saying about with the measures. We have actually looked at the performance of these measures and are preparing a report there that will be available on the ASAP website in the similar timeline that Sarah was just showing. So I just wanted to give an update there.
And the next question I have is from Tina Warren. Were there any questions about how parents felt or whether they believed that culture was significantly embedded in the program?
I don't think we asked parents about their feelings about how culture was embedded in the program.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, and part of the development, that wasn't something that, Michelle, I recall coming up, but Tina definitely tried to be more focused to make sure we captured the cultural connections with the community. I think that's more where we had conversation or had the questions for the parents, was more at the cultural connections in the community. Thank you for the question.
And I just wanted to add to that also that as we plan for AIAN FACES 2019, we'll certainly be using the data and the findings from 2015 to think about how, what are our priority areas for deepening our understanding. And that process has not started yet. We'll have the same similar work group approach, that there's those 4 groups coming together to plan for the study. But my hunch is that really digging more deeply into culture and language in the classroom is going to be a big area of focus in planning for AIAN FACES 2019. And when I mentioned, these 3 possibilities of aligning, adding, and adapting, certainly everything we did in the add and adapt category fell into, the culture and language arena. And not only in terms of how do data collectors sensitively engage and approach and be in tribal programs and with tribal children and staff, but also around measurement. And so measuring culture and language in the classroom, especially tribal language and culture, there's really very little guidance in the research literature on how to do that. And so our work group designed, and Sarah presented on some of those data, a measure of cultural items and practices in the classroom. But I think parents' experiences and understandings, and just I've heard, I've been immersed in the data, but hearing it here myself again, was struck by how many parents value their children learning their tribal language versus how many parents are able to do that at home, or how many children have exposure in the classroom, which is less. And so I think there is something to be understood in that gap between beliefs and values and then actual practices and experiences.
Thank you, Michelle. I had a question about if we could put back up the contact information slide and to provide a little more information about where the data will be released, which website.
Sure. So this is the slide here is the ACF website for AIAN FACES. And I think probably eventually, Laura, we could talk that it provides the link, but I'll pause for 1 second and then I'll go backwards to the slide that has where the data will be housed, or the ability to apply for access for the data. I'll wait 1 second. This is a pretty long website. Here in the middle of the slide, you'll see an underlined, about right in the middle. It's www.researchconnections.org. That is where information and the actual application for the data will be located.
Okay, great, thank you. I have another question on slide 29. The experiences per month, is it outside the Head Start class?
Yeah, this would be parents reporting on experiences in the community. So I don't think we instructed them not to include in the program, but it was phrased in that way.
I saw a question, Laura. It says, is this testing similar to measures used by Head Start programs in school districts, both in Native communities and across the country? I don't know, maybe Lisa or Sarah.
So is the testing similar to the measures used by Head Start programs and school districts, both in Native communities and across the country?
Yeah, I think it varies by program, but I know that some programs do commonly use the Woodcock-Johnson and the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, and generally take a similar approach of doing one-on-one. They may, in terms of schools and such, they sometimes may develop their own local measures for these age groups, especially kindergarten entry. But most of these measures that I listed, the PPVT, the EOW, PVT, the Woodcock-Johnson, are standardized measures with generally national norms. So they are commonly used by other locations, and I know a few of them may have been used by some of the program. But as we were talking about before, in terms of norming group, there is still wanting to make sure that how these measures fairly perform with American Indian, Alaska Native children. So this was an opportunity we had uniquely in AIAN FACES because of the number of children we had to be able to look at that with these measures.
Laura, this is Michelle.
Sure.
I think there was another part of Joseph's question that I may have missed, and he asked, were the classroom observations conducted by Native observers? And so I just wanted to speak to that real briefly. So our work group really identified as a priority to have Native classroom observers, again, for reasons I'm sure many of you can imagine, that knowing what, emotional support, for example, might look like in a tribal classroom, there may be different ways that adult teachers interact with children or vice versa that, don't fit the typical, way of interacting in other non-Native classrooms. And so our work group was very concerned that the observers would indeed see the ways that, just as an example, emotional support manifests in tribal classrooms and not through cultural misunderstanding, not see that. And so we really came up against some challenges in finding Native observers or even observers who may have been non-Native, who had a lot of experience in tribal classrooms. And I think that identified a larger issue of having classroom observers who are Native and or have substantial experience in tribal classrooms, that we weren't able to address that ourselves in this study. But what we did do is work very hard to ensure that those observers had gone through that cultural understanding training that was developed by our work group, as well as, and again, we partnered with a tribal Head Start program who very generously and graciously allowed us to hang out with them for a week, observing their classrooms, talking to their teachers, hearing from their tribal leaders, and to be able to conduct those what they call reliability assessments in those tribal Head Start classrooms. And Sarah was very, very involved in that training and that effort, but we really took that charge very seriously and did our best to make sure that those observers had a good lens, I guess you'd say, when they approached those tribal classrooms.
We also were able to obtain some classroom video clips from some of our work group members that they gave us permission to use for the purposes of the training, which was really nice because obviously we were in one place for the observation training, so we were observing the context of one community, one tribe. This gave the classroom observers a chance to have some examples of other classrooms from other places in the country as well.
Thank you. We also had a request if we could go back to the contact slide. I know folks need to copy down, and it's a lot.
Well, I'm just wondering if this one slide can be shared with all of the participants today.
Yes.
I think we could follow up in an email and get this out to all of you who are on the call today.
Yes.
Was there anything else, Laura? I think Joseph had a further comment. He said it's difficult for a non-Native to accurately assess a Native classroom.
Yes, thank you. He says that he has 25 years in Native Head Start programs and additionally 10 years prior to that researching Natives. And I would not feel comfortable to accurately fully assess the range of children's actions, reactions, expressions, and status.
And I think that's fair. And I think it's really hard to, prepare people to have a lens that will allow them to see all of the nuances and subtleties and the different ways that people have of interacting in different cultural and contextual settings. And I guess as researchers, and I think as our tribal Head Start partners, that we always, keep that in mind, that no one assessment, no one tool, everything can always be, there's a caveat. And I think we're really mindful also of the limitations of our work. And again, as a researcher, I know that's, really drilled into our training, that we always are cognizant of the limitations of our work, because no study, no data point is ever the full truth. And so I think that's why we're really conscientious and endeavor to do our best in telling the story, if you will, based on these data, both of these presentations, but I think also there's a picture on the screen right now. Well, that's of our flyer, but the briefs that will be coming out, we really hope to be able to flesh out the story more, and that's that dissemination piece, the design, implementation, and dissemination guidance that the work group has given to the study. And on the dissemination piece, that we're mindful of limitations such as what you mentioned here.
Thank you, Michelle. I also have another question from Alexis Merkla. Did your study include any urban Indian sites?
Yeah, so that they Region 11, they have to be Region 11 grantees, so we didn't have the detailed information to look at urbanicity in particular. They would be anyone who has a Region 11.
Yeah, this is Angie, and that's true. Region 11 funds federally recognized tribes, and there are many tribal programs like associations or urban Indian centers that work with Head Start, but we do not serve those. And you're right, the only tribes that were involved were those that are funded through Region 11. And, we have some consortia, but they're not really none of them are in large urban areas or even smaller urban areas. I can think of maybe one. But the process for selection, I don't know if you want to address that, but if someone on the phone, one of the panelists want to address that, it did involve reaching out to Region 11 programs.
Right, so anyone in Region 11 who were providing direct services would have been eligible, and we did a random selection among those Region 11 grantees.
So I think, based on who Region 11 funds, urban programs are just not likely. Is that right, Angie?
Yeah, that's right.
But it's really important population to understand. The majority of the American Indian Alaska Native population is urban, but probably the majority of research is with rural or reservation or Alaska Native village populations.
And if I could just add shortly, I know there's been discussions around. First of all, it's wonderful to have the focus on Region 11 programs, AIAN. They were never included, as several people mentioned on the call, on the webinar earlier. But I think through all of our discussions, we do look at how the information can be used to support all American Indian and Alaska Native children served through the Office of Head Start. And it's one of the reasons why we do include both numbers when we open the webinar.
Thank you, Angie. So the question comes from Elizabeth Cushman. She was wondering, were there any analysis done by any geographic groups? Are there only results for the national sample?
So the results are only for the national sample. We have not looked at sort of subregions, and I'm not sure that we're set up to support looking regionally.
This is Michelle. I just wanted to add to that. Maybe Sarah and Lisa, you could go back to that pyramid with our sample and the 21 programs. So there you go. So we visited 21 programs in 21 different tribal communities across the country. So if you think back to that map of the United States with the states that are shaded red, those 21 programs were from across those red shaded states. And I know that the tribal Head Start directors who were part of the work group really, when we were deciding the population of interest, they really wanted to ensure that there would be representation from across the country, north, south, east, west, and Alaska. And they were, really pointing out the important regional differences within Region 11, in the Southwest versus the Northwest versus Alaska in terms of, culture and language for one. But this piece was really, in the end, hard to explore just because if we divide the entire Region 11, those 21 programs that are representative of Region 11 up into subregions, the sample sizes get a lot smaller, and so that's where substantive interest, I think, comes up against the limits sometimes of what can be done with the data that you gather, with the resources that you have. And so I think something that we've all had to make peace with, that these data are representative for Region 11 as a whole, but they are not representative if you break it down any further into any further subdivisions. I think the other piece that I guess was an upside of this being representative of Region 11 as a whole is it's an added protection for community confidentiality. And so for those of you who are familiar with research in tribal communities, for some communities, maintaining their privacy and confidentiality as a community and not being named in studies is important to them. Other communities feel differently and want to be named, but I think for those 21 programs that agreed to be part of this study, having that assurance that their identities at the community level would also be protected was, I think, a consideration in their willingness to participate in this study, especially when it comes to having the restricted use data set that will be available to other researchers. I think they felt more comfortable knowing that nobody would be able to, analyze and, say something about their community specifically, that this is about Region 11 Head Start. So I said a lot there, but those were some of the factors that went into sticking to these data being representative of Region 11 as a whole and not breaking it down into any further subdivisions. Again, not that that's not a worthwhile or really substantive line of inquiry, but that's how this study was designed.
Thank you, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Do any of the presenters want to add anything to what they have said already? Anything additional that they would want folks to hear?
This is Michelle. As Laura shared at the beginning, this webinar is recorded, and so we're really eager to get information about the study out. So we'll follow up with the link to the recording to all of you who are on the webinar today, as well as everyone who was on Monday, to share with your colleagues wherever you may be, and also to stay tuned for these reports, the technical report and 3 briefs that will be coming out in the spring, to share those broadly as well. And we will be at the National Indian Head Start Directors Association annual meeting. Mavany, that's going to be the DC area, right?
Yes. 2018, the National Indian Head Start Directors Association conference is in Nashville.
Oh, in Nashville. Okay. So we will be participating in that meeting in Nashville, and hopefully some of you on the line are also at that meeting. So we're really just, as Mavany said, the tribal communities who participated, the tribal programs, and the whole work group involved in this effort really wants the story and the information and the data from AIAN FACES to be shared broadly. And for those of you who may know researchers who would have an interest in the data, stay tuned for those data becoming available to qualified researchers as well.
I'm not seeing any additional questions. I'm seeing a thank you from some of the folks that are listening, so I wanted to share that with our speakers. And if anyone else has any other questions, my email, Laura Horde, is on the slide, and you can feel free to email me, and I can get the question out to the folks that were the presenters to help get your questions answered.
This is Angie, and again, in closing, I would like to thank all of the presenters, but I would like to thank everyone who's worked on this for many years. This is actually historical to have this data and these findings, so I thank you for joining us. I think there's going to be many opportunities to use the data to improve and support children and families in AIAN communities. So with that, I'd like to thank the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation and the Office of Head Start staff. That includes Maria Wolverton, Mary Muggenborg, Meryl Borofsky, Laura Horde, Alita Meyer, W.J. Strickland, and Captain Robert Bayless. Also, the AIAN FACES 2015 Workgroup, which, as you heard earlier, is federal. It's directors, Head Start directors, researchers, just a wonderful group of people who spent many years working on this. And the 21 Region 11 Head Start program staff, families, and communities who participated. So just thanks to everyone. And we look forward to the briefs and to much more information that we can share with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Angie.